Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Founder of Bloomberg Philanthropies, Michael Bloomberg. Excellent heads of states, leader of governments, civil society, philanthropists, businessmen, climate activists, secretary, heads of missions at the United Nations, champions of the high level of climate change at the UN and COP26, Nigel Topping, champion of the high level of climate action on COP27, Marmut Molendin, media, and the news. In the last few years, for me, this has been a constant subject. I had to introduce it in political discourse in Colombia when I was having a campaign in Bogota. While in the Bogota government, I tried to build a coordinated urban plan with a climate crisis, but it cost me my candidacy because we were fired. But this was a central axis of my presidential campaign. Several years have gone by since. In 2009, when we started discussing this in Colombia, but things are getting worse. There were many events besides COPs. There was a kind of a Hollywood party around the climate crisis in Colombia and in the world, but I believe that we are now really of non-return. We haven't listened to science. We have not listened, not because politics is incompetent. We need to understand this to be able to attack this. It is not that politics is incompetent, which makes the humanity at a point of no return, but it's rather powerful and specific economic interests. Somehow, capitalism as such, as we know it, began in the world during the Industrial Revolution when we started using fossil fuel, water, steam. The steam engine that began the Industrial Revolution was produced by using boilers with carbon, first carbon, then oil, which then became the great energy engines of a specific way of producing for humanity and consumer. A specific relationship between humans to face production and consumption, and that's what we call capitalism. I think that the fact that we haven't faced this facet of the problem leads us to not understand what happens in the world. If we follow the logic of capitalism, which is to produce more in order to sell more so that the owners gain more and more money, this is a production logic which then leads us to use their energy engines more and more, and these engines use carbon and oil, then, of course, today it is clear that some economic structure and certain processes in production during the history of humanity have led us to the climate crisis. So you must ask yourselves, can we stop this logic? Somehow, and perhaps naively, we can ask whether capital should make less money, or if we look at it a little bit more realistically, does capital, the way that we produce more and more, consume more and more, and make more and more money, can that change its own technical engine of accumulation of carbon and oil towards what we call clean energy? Can we abandon carbon and oil as basic commodities as for production. We cannot answer that question, really. Can capital overcome the limit imposed in terms of life of the intensive use of carbon and oil? If you study classic economic theory, which studied capital, classical thinking in economics for 2 years, which were forgotten by the dominant economic theory in the world in the last decades, you could see that if from that view, technology is only introduced in the production process from the view of capital if it's more productive. In other words, can it generate more revenue? Any technology that does not generate revenue is discarded by capitalism. So the question becomes, are technologies for clean energy able to be more productive than technology that use fossil energy, so that capitalism can introduce them to maybe make more money? There is no answer to that. No one can say one way or the other that there is thinking leading us to for a clean, decarbonized energy to be more productive than the fossil economy. So we don't have that answer, and we have to wonder, does capitalism, can it overcome this climate crisis, or will it lead us to the destruction of humanity? So then we are at the door of enormous political tension in the world that aren't necessarily peaceful in the end stage of what we call climate crisis or climate disaster. At the UN, our speeches, the UN narrative really, built throughout COPs, which usually take place in cities that are sponsored by big powers of the fossil economy, try and sell you a theory that may have some basis, but you must question it. Because climate crisis is caused by a commercial way of production, the market itself could solve it. This extends the theory, this paradigm that has dominated countries, ministers of economy, governors, academics. A paradigm that is born out of a model that was invented by Leon Balras. He didn't really think this would become the dominant thinking. But he was simply trying to respond to the classic political economy, his questions about capitals and its possible limits. He was able to build a mathematical model in which the market, the free market, would lead us to a maximization of well-being for people and for society. It is the theory of the general well-being. When we talk about maximization, we always talk about math, calculus, to maximize the derivatives to equal zero. That's how you maximize. He then used that differential calculus to try and build continuous functions using supply, demand to reach a maximum level and concluded that if the market was free, then it could maximize individual and social well-being. This theory was the theoretical answer to the political economy at the beginning of the 20th century, and it irradiated throughout the world as the paradigm to be followed. And if you did not follow it, it was like a sin. Had anybody dared see it differently? If anyone said something that didn't follow that kind of content, you have experienced throughout all these decades the application of this thesis. It has been presented by the media, by experts in economics and those who are not experts. It was presented as a scientific law. This mathematical paradigm, this mathematical complexity has been used, in fact, to support the scientific basis of such a proposition, which is not really scientific, but rather ideological. It's an ideological position, like Lambadieu, the philosopher, used to say. The intensive use of mathematics sometimes does not legitimize science, but rather, in some cases, in human sciences, what it does is it legitimizes ideologies. And that's the ideology that we've been living under in theory, in academics, and the economic schools, and in the daily politics, and in culture as well. So, when scientists discover, this is what happens when scientists discover climate change, who are not politicians. The expert panels have shown us that this economic paradigm has been destroyed. It was the opposite of what was preached, which was that the free market would maximize social well-being. But we saw that if we keep going, we will be extinct as humans. That is a brutal collapse of the ideology and of economy. This puts us in a difficult scenario because we're not sure what to do. We don't really know what to do at this final stages of the human species, because what science has told us, we do not act, and we continue as we are. The false infinity that Hegel was mentioning, to produce more, to consume more, and believe that makes us happier. The more we consume, the happier we are. If we keep on going, this will only lead to the definite disappearance of the human species, and not in millennia from now. I think Stephen Hawking was mentioning 200 years, but today's scientists that survive him would shorten that time. Of course, a scientific thesis would tell the oil industry or the risk capital funds that really dominate the economic structure of the world. What do they say to people's beliefs? That as we could show you here, they would say that we're surrounded by things that were made from oil and or carbon, like this speaker or this watch. If our way of life, some more luxurious, some less luxurious, is for centuries by these energy engines of accumulation of capital, which are carbon and oil. If we talk about escapes by throwing something into the atmosphere, we could cool it. Some consensual lies would lead us to believe we're moving towards transition, but that never starts. Then automatically we are led towards where we have nothing more to do. So why is there no social or political action in the world? What it means, because we would have to make big changes that are hard to do, because our daily lives would be affected, whether you're living in a powerful economy. If we to be able to get rid of oil and carbon quickly, we would have to change our way of life, and that's almost unthinkable. What would humanity look like? What would that economy look like? We can talk about it, we can write about it. Using the UN language, we could say it's easy if it's consensual, but we can talk about it, decarbonized economy. But what is that? Outside outside the fact that it has no carbon or of oil, what does it look like? What kind of productivity does that have? What is the social relationships that are established by people around an economy that is has this new way of producing and consuming? It's capitalism, still the same, under the inertia of keeping an ideology. What we've come to in the last few years, think that the market would become internal. It's an externality that all of a sudden appears out of the blue. This climate crisis, if you talk about market prices, this cost of the climate crisis would be called carbon taxes. Could that alone resolve our problem? Well, that is the 1989 Nobel Prize of Economics theory. That's the basis under which the UN and the governments of the world are moving under. Even carbon taxes aren't used all over. They haven't been agreed or accepted in this neoliberal thinking that has been created to try to resolve a climate crisis, even in an argument. However, it's quite difficult to understand rationally how what the market has produced can be resolved and solved by the market. In fact, it's almost like running away, because if we really think about it, if we want to solve the climate crisis that mean a total change of technology, of consumption and production, then we would have to look at it from another space, which is not the market, which should be regulated. And think about just that. What that means in politics, that sentence. To start new planning, the public power, the people's power, it's not just national power, it would have to be multilateral and global if we wanted to, in the time that we have left, make these transformations we need to make. That would mean need enormous investment of money and finances to take these leaps and build the indicators of a true decarbonized economy, which is what we're doing. Are we doing that? I think the answer is we are not. Lobbies, the oil and carbon lobby, and the industries, which is the fossil economy, 90% of the world economy, is powerful enough to make this very irrational, politically speaking, because knowing, as science tells us, that we're at a crisis of civilization, we're still doing nothing. We just slow down the process. We make up ideologies like that movie that talked about this, Don't Look Up, right? That movie. But we play the ostrich and hide our head in the sand. We're not facing the problem. We go from COP to COP to COP until the time is over. Political tension is clear. We can see that today, of course, and people suffer more and more the climate crisis, the catastrophe, because this isn't just a lie. Every day, more and more, we see more and more facts. Some are very visible. No water, you lose nutrients, you lose the natural balance in many places in the world that produce mass exodus because people won't die of hunger, and they go to where they think the water and food awaits, which is move north. And then there is another political problem. It's very difficult. How do you defend from foreigners, from immigration? Is the immediate effect. That's not the solution to the problem. Legislation, walls, guns, jails, concentration camps, returning population believes once again in pure racist or superior racist ideologies of West, like in 1933, but now all over the world. Political tension that is not just seen in these mass exodus or the strong capitalism in developed countries, but we look at it and you can see it in the war in Russia and Ukraine, with cultural and historic background that they may have their own historical complexity, but is still increased because of the climate crisis, because Western Europe was unable to free itself and become independent from gas, and gas is a fossil fuel. Even if the European Union resolution says that it's clean fuel, that doesn't stop it from being a greenhouse emitter. First of all, Germany and Western Europe were unable to. The time was not enough to free themselves from gas, and we're back in war, like at the beginning of the century, the war because of oil. This will increase. This tension will increase if humanity is not able to find answers and tools that will allow us to move to a decarbonized economy. It is a challenge for all of humanity, not just a political challenge. It is time for politics with a P to be stay away from these powerful interests. It is a time for innovation, and which is provoked by crises of a species. We need to reinvent ourselves. We have to see. But we have not yet been able to build enough tools to overcome this crisis. Some say that this is an discourse of the apocalypse. Some Cambridge theoreticians have not been yet scientifically proven, but some say that this coronavirus, for example, it has its roots in climate crisis, that the bats changed their flights to try and find food because of climate change, brought some species and viruses in contact with humanity, and this brought our virus. Those who had us provoked us to live completely differently from before. A virus made us do that, changed the way we lived. Then what would 10 or 20 or 100 viruses that are more powerful can do? And they could come because of this climate crisis. COVID-19 is almost like a lab test of what is coming if we're not able to change our world economic system in the short term. This is a task for politicians as never before. We have a role to play. It's not just a task for the economy. It is a task for political subject. It's something that people have to do, thinking collectively. They have to debate. People who care about humanity, who can act efficiently so that we can cause these big ideological, political, and social changes that are needed so that humanity can live. Shall I stop? I think that's basically my evaluation on the last few years where we've been fighting, but still we've been very inefficient to stop climate change. Thank you.